constantly raising the bar. Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses? You or your enemy right now?
Is success a lie?
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Student Side Hustle. This week I'm speaking to Steve Taylor. Steve Taylor is a dietitian. He has worked with 3DMJ and he does a lot of stuff when it comes to adherence, and also he has a very strong opinion on that sort of stuff. So that's probably going to be the main underpinning of our conversation today. So Steve, how did you get into this? How did this all start? And where did you take your brand, and where's your brand today, and where do you want to take it in the future?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on, James. I appreciate it. And I actually started off on the kind of the physique athlete, resistance training side of stuff. I played high school back I played football back in high school, and I was the small guy on the team, and just like most people, got into resistance training and began to fall in love with that, and then realized that was kind of capped by my nutrition intake. And so I started studying nutrition more, and then I went and worked for GNC, a supplement store here in the States, for 5 years, and started selling supplements. And now it's kind of was researching supplementation, and I was researching nutrition, and I was resistance training. And I just kind of fell more and more in love with that. And I was like, I want to actually get some formal training. And so I went to University of Missouri and got my undergraduate degree in nutritional sciences and exercise physiology. And then I still, wasn't satisfied. I wanted to continue to learn more. And at this point, it was more for myself. Never really thought about building a brand around it. It was just I just loved learning about the information, and I wanted to make sure that what I was learning was legitimate. And so I then went and pursued my master's at Washington State, and after that, finished my master's in nutrition, dietetics, and exercise physiology, and then moved to California to do an internship with 3D Muscle Journey. And got my RD, my certification, and then opened my practice there.
And then, so how did that sort of lead into where you are today? And what do you see as the main focuses of your brand, and sort of the main things that you like to sort of focus your expertise on?
Yeah, when I kind of first started my brand, I kind of opened the doors to everyone. So I worked with physique athletes. I kind of prepared people for different events like weddings. I worked with general pop who were wanting to make these sustainable behavior changes. And so I tried to give myself just a broad experience of just a whole bunch of different scenarios, because at the time I really thought that I wanted to coach people to prep them for events like bodybuilding competitions, powerlifting meets, things like that. And the more I got into it, and as I kind of started to collect experience with different populations, I fell in love with general population and just making these long-term behavior changes. And so that happens pretty quickly after I kind of started my brand, and that's where my focus has been ever since.
Yeah. So what made you focus on the general pop? What do you think was it about them? Was it the challenge of trying to get them adherent, or what do you think was the main thing that made you sort of look at them and think, damn, this is where I can make a real difference? And do you think, because a lot of the physique competitors, they're already relatively healthy, do you feel like with them it's more optimization, but with Gen Pop you can literally change their life from like 0 to 100? Like
that was what it was. It was like I saw the impact of it. I saw that, like you said, because like when you're working with a physique athlete, you're working with someone who is already in shape. They already feel good. They already, for the most part, feel good about the way they look for the most situations. And with the Gen Pop, it's like you have people who are coming to you, and these strategies are completely new to them, and they're used to kind of some of the old paradigms of dieting, of like meal plans and like all these things they hear in popular magazines and things they see on the news, and it just gets very confusing. And so it's like once these people start applying just these very simple concepts and they start getting these results, it's just I love the carryover effect it had into, because like obviously, like I guess that maybe I should explain a little bit about how kind of my process works. But all my check-ins, they're live. And so they're just like this, they're a conversation.
Yeah.
And so naturally through a conversation, like there's only so much you can say about food and exercising. And so you begin to hear about, what's going on in the other areas of their life. And you I would see that like once they really got the ball moving with their health and how they felt, it had this carryover effect on their relationships, on their career, on just their overall self-confidence and self-esteem. And it's just like, that just got me hooked. And yeah.
And do you feel like what in your opinion or from your view what are sort of the keys to adherence? Because I think we discussed a little bit before the show about adherence and why it's so key. And I think on Eric Helm's his strength pyramid, it's literally the bottom. It's like you cannot go up without adherence. And I think it's just such a key thing. How do you go about developing adherence and developing it for the long term? Because I think a lot of people can be adherent for like 2 weeks, but I think what are your sort of strategies to help someone develop long-term adherence and sustainable changes?
My first thing really is focusing on the motives for, why they're doing this in the first place. And so it's like when someone first comes to me and they talk about this stuff, that's always like my central focus is like, why are you reaching out? Why are you wanting to make these changes? Like, what are your motives for action? And I look for reasons that are going to last through time. So not something that's going to be just 8 weeks from now, but what's something that's going to last 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah.
And that I would say is by far the biggest thing. Cause like we all know it. Like if the motivation is there, we can do pretty much anything. And so it's the same thing with making these changes around how someone eats or how they move or going to the gym or starting to track their steps or whatever it is. It's like if the motivation is there, then the rest of it will be easy. Like at that point, they're just like, they're ready, they're fired up, and all they need then is the guidance. And it's like you're not having to like drag them and like come along. It's just like they're just fired up, and it's just like, hey, here's these simple rules, like these guidelines, and it's like they're just doing their thing. So that is my starting point is looking at where their motivation is, and like sometimes a lot of times they haven't even thought about it from that perspective yet. They just kind of know they've just had this discomfort, this dissatisfaction inside, and they're not happy with the way they look, and they're not happy with the way they feel, but they've never really dug into that. And so a lot of times we'll discover that together. It's like they reach out and they're like, hey, I want to change these things. I'll say why. And, they'll maybe mention about self-confidence and things like that. And then it's like what I do from there is I ask questions that kind of prompt and get them to bring these things forward that may have been on the back burner for a while. And I try to stir up the motivation within them to help, because I can never tell anyone anything. Like, no one wants to be told what to do, Like, so it's like all I can do is like help elicit from within them why they're doing this stuff, and help them to clearly kind of articulate these thoughts through good questions.
Yeah. So do you feel like you're sort of like, I think for me, when I started getting into weightlifting, it's like my why came relatively easily. And do you feel like for a lot of people, they just sort of need to figure out why, and then that's the key for them continuing and doing it for years and years? Because I think that's the hard bit, is getting them to do it for years and years. And what do you think are the main challenges with adherence? Because I think obviously if you don't have it, then you pretty much have nothing.
Yeah. I just back to the first part. Again, like that's why I focus so much on the why, because like once that's in place, then the rest will fall into place. And sometimes even, because at some point, like sometimes like you can't identify, like that they are dissatisfied and they want to change the stuff, and even if they can't identify a larger why to begin with, like sometimes that stuff is discovered along the way, and a lot of that comes down to that they've had a lot of let's say they've tried to diet before and lose weight before, but it hasn't been successful. They've lost weight, gained it, lost weight, gained it. And so they, at some level, they don't really believe yet that it's possible to lose weight and keep it off. So to ask them to formulate, why are you doing this? It can be kind of overwhelming because at the time they don't even necessarily believe that it's possible. They just want to do that, but they don't believe it's possible yet. So sometimes what I'll do from there is just say, hey, okay, well, let's get the process going. And then once we get the process going, then based on their experience and their new references, they start to generate these new beliefs that it is possible. And then from there, we can formulate a bigger why. And then kind of touching on the latter part of that question, along with the why, is making sure that is the like the appropriate method selection. Yeah. And so there's just so much information out there, as we both know, a lot of myths around nutrition and food and exercise and all this stuff. So it's just kind of trying to get people to kind of kind of weed through some of that misinformation and let go of some of that stuff that's not true and replace it with correct information. And making sure that all those myths are taken care of, and then from there, keeping it simple. Like I try to make it as simple as possible for someone to, like, whatever their protocol is. Right. So I want them to track the least amount of variables. Right. And I want them to,
So say for example, if someone found it very hard to adhere, would you sort of try and make sure, like, what would be the very, very basic thing that they must understand? Would that be calories in, calories out? Would there be macronutrients? Would that just be saying, okay, you need a ratio of vegetables, ratio of this, ratio of that? What would be sort of the framework, the most basic framework that sort of must be understood?
In regards to adherence?
Yeah.
I would literally ask the question, what has prevented you from adhering? What's going on? And, then they could come back with, well, it's just, because if it comes back with a lot of stuff like, I don't have time or, I'm super busy or all that stuff, I'll maybe conquer some of those hurdles. I'll say, okay, well, if we had it set up to where we did work around this, then would you be able to adhere? And they're like, well, no, because then this. And so it's like at that point, it might be more of a motivation thing and they're not fully on board yet. And so if that's the case, again, I would kind of go back into like helping them discover their why, which if it was more on like they're truly like fired up and adherence is not happening, honestly, that's so rare. Like, because if I've done my job right in terms of like providing them the right framework. So like, for example, like Gen Pop, I pretty much rarely have anyone count all their macronutrients. Most of the time it's calorie intake, and I might have them do calories, and I might have them like have a fruit and vegetable target and maybe a protein target or something like that. I keep it so simple, and like that's even a progression. Sometimes it's literally just the behavioral stuff. Yeah. So, because again, like if the motivation is there, they're kind of like they're ready to go. Yeah. And so the adherence thing normally is due to the lack of kind of motivation or not being fully on board yet. Right. Not necessarily the nutrition side of stuff or the way our nutritional strategies are set up.
So for the most part, if there's a lack of adherence, it comes from more not being fully into it, not a lack of knowledge or not a lack of any of those aspects.
Yeah, for most, that's because again, like if the motivation is that high and they have a really strong why for why they're doing this stuff, like they'll find a way to hit their targets. You know. Yeah. Like it's like we've all done that. Like when we're really fired up about something, it doesn't matter like how crazy our day is or how busy we are or if we're traveling or what's going on. Like it doesn't matter. Like we're gonna hit the targets. Like even if it's just like 3 square meals or whatever it is. Like like if the motivation is there, like we will find a way to hit it. And that's why it's like that's where my focus is. It's like why are we doing this? Because if I can get that in place, it's like the rest will follow. Yeah.
And do you find when you're teaching people things like calories in, calories out, do you find a lot of them find the concept hard to grasp? Or they'll do things like weigh their uncooked chicken and track it as cooked or something, or do you find those sort of things, or just the concept of calories, do you find that's hard to sort of transfer over to general population? Because I think a lot of people find it strange still that is how it works, which is... Do you think there's any disputes to that's how it works? Do you think there's any exceptions?
I would say, like, in terms of a lot of people I work with, the concept of like counting calories has been around for a while. And so a lot of people I work with kind of like are familiar with the concept of energy balance, and just because of some of the popular diets that have been out there. So most people are on board with that. A lot of times the confusion comes around some of the other stuff. So it's like maybe meal timing, or it comes around specific nutrients or specific types of food. I think the types of food thing, even though they agree with energy balance, I think that just because of kind of like what's out there in the public, we're kind of conditioned to believe that certain foods are bad and certain foods are good. And so it's like getting them, just helping people to see that, you know, there is no good and bad foods, and that, you know, it's more about the context of the whole diet, and that quantity plays a big role. And so, those are more, most people are pretty on board. I don't get a lot of feedback of like, you know, energy balance doesn't work, or you know, calories in, calories out doesn't work. So I think that's been around even like way before flexible dieting got popular and IFYM and all that stuff. So I mean, like, a lot of like mainstream diets have been based around that concept. So most people are on board with that. It's some of the other myths that I make sure that we've cleared that stuff up. And
what would be? I think it's a very cheesy question, but I think it's an important question. What do you see as some of the main myths that are still prevalent, and that people come in with and they say, "Oh, I've been told this," and then you think, "Oh my god, like this is just ridiculous." What are the sort of things that just, like, you know, are just straight up not true or just not relevant to the situation?
It's a good question. There's let me think. There's quite a few. I would say, and the thing is, like, I can't blame anyone, because like I used to think all that same stuff as well before I started pursuing this stuff, and like, and some of it, like, as we both know, like, it's presented in a way where it's very misleading. Like things are, like, statements are taken out of context, and somebody could write a really pretty blog post around it, and it sounds legitimate. So it's like, it's not at any fault of anyone. It's like
pseudoscience.
Somebody, like, it's confusing. It's like when I walk into a mechanic shop and I'm like looking at my engine, like, I have no idea what's going on, you know? So it's like, they could tell me like, "Oh yeah, that belt looks good or bad," and like I have no idea. So,
exactly.
Like, that's always kind of like how I center myself as well. It's like I try to imagine when I'm explaining this stuff, it's like, this is similar to me like trying to somebody talking to me about a car. But I would say some of the most popular stuff is just around sugar in general. Is a pretty big one, and meal timing is a pretty big one. So I try to make sure that stuff is cleared up. Like, like kind of a popular one is, a lot of people a focus is how much, you know, how many grams of sugar should I consume per day. And, you know, I try to change the question of you know, it's not so much how much sugar should you consume per day. It's like, as long as we have kind of your calories right, and you're hitting your fruit target, and you're hitting your vegetable target, and you're hitting your protein target, and you're getting enough fiber, it's like, there's really not a lot of, for most people, there's really not a lot of extra room for a bunch of processed sugars.
So it's like if you fix those things, the sugar will fix itself.
Exactly.
So then, when does sugar become an issue, or when does something like that become an issue? Because I think, for example, one of my future guests, as I think what we mentioned before the show, they're like a keto researcher. They're very, not just anti-sugar, but anti-high carbohydrate, and they want just for the general population. When do you see? I think they're quite unbiased about their perspective. Hopefully, we'll see when I interview them. But do you find? I think it's quite common that a lot of people on keto are very keto warrior. But do you think when do the carbohydrates become an issue? And would that just be in things like type 2 diabetes? Would that just be the main place that it does play a really bad issue? Or do you think a lot of overconsumption is due to carbohydrates, or just not eating enough protein and fat?
I think the latter is pretty accurate. It's sugar is, it's not that like sugar itself causes issues. It's just like the way the environment is set up, and there's just so much sugar out there, and it's just so easy to overconsume.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's why it's like totally like understandable where people are coming from with like, you know, kind of the focus being on sugar, because it is very easy to overconsume. It's everywhere, and like a lot of foods are, their caloric density comes from sugar.
Yeah.
And so like it all makes sense. And so it's like when it becomes an issue is like when those other things aren't in place, when their calorie balance isn't in place, when they're not in a deficit, and when they're not consuming enough protein, and like it can also come into, I mean, that's the biggest thing. That's why I'm saying, like, instead of like putting my focus on like specific sugar intake, it's I make sure the calories are right, I make sure the protein's right, and fruits and vegetables are right, and then for the most part, like the rest of the stuff fixes itself.
Yeah. So do you find like from there you can almost, if you get certain things right, then issues like eating too much cholesterol or eating too much sugar or eating X, Y, or Z or whatever X bad food or quote unquote bad food, do you find once you've got the main things correct, that almost just fixes itself? Because like my thing is, say if they're trying to gain weight, when do you see the issue? Like for example, if they're a really skinny dude, they just want to gain muscle, get bigger. I find it very, very difficult personally, because I find I would say I probably overconsume sugar and just eat so much sugar, and it is at some points it is quite atrocious. And then I'm doing all these classes around diabetes for my degree, and it's very, very very conflicting. Do you think when for someone gaining weight, or like very obviously very slow, we're talking like half a kilo a month, but when would you say something like overconsumption needs to be looked at health wise?
Yeah, and see, that's where it gets a little tricky, because like if you're talking about weight gain, it's like, of course you want to keep, like, you still want to hit your fiber intake and you still want to hit your protein, everything like that, but like if you're somebody who has if you're very resistant to weight gain, and you naturally have a thin frame, and you have a hard time gaining weight, if you only consume fiber dense foods and like very voluminous foods, like eventually you'll run into GI symptoms that limits your ability to gain weight. And so, and again, like that's why I've written so many articles and had so many questions around fiber intakes, because like it's like you're trying to maintain, you know, a proper, like let's say, quote unquote healthy diet, but you're also trying to gain weight. If you only do it through whole foods, I mean, being constantly bloated and gassy and things like that can cause nutrient malabsorption. Like that's not necessarily healthy either. So it's like it's finding that balance, and eventually you do run into a spot where it's like protein's where it needs to be, and you're consuming about as much fiber as you can consume without it causing negative effects. And so you really only have two options left to get your calories: from fat or simpler carbohydrates that don't come with all the volume and don't come with the fiber and things like that. And so, and some of that too is the one thing I always kind of recommend people, and that's why I love kind of like where things are heading with nutritional science and just kind of the whole weight loss, weight gain system is there's a lot of personal preference. So like, see how you feel eating different foods. Like really I think that is downplayed a lot. Is like people's individual responses to various foods or various nutrients. Like if you consume a bunch of lactose and you experience a bunch of GI issues, like, you know, probably don't consume a bunch of lactose. And so it's like the same thing. Like if you notice you're consuming certain nutrients and they're causing you to feel terrible, then adjust what you're doing and try something else, and really lean on how you're feeling. Do you think, and let that be a guide.
Is that a good marker for the majority of people? Like if we look at, I believe Nunes, he consumes quite a high carbohydrate diet, and then I don't have anyone to compare it to, but obviously someone who thrives on keto, then that's exact opposite? So it's like, and maybe that works equally good for them, but do you think it's about sort of keeping an open perspective and realizing that no diet in reality can be the best or can be king? Like, it's so subjective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. Because again, it all ultimately comes back to the adherence thing. So it's the same thing. There's a lot of people who are very successful following a ketogenic diet, and I always just ask, like, is this something that you want to maintain for like a lifestyle? And if it's like, no, I just want to do this for 8 weeks, well, then that's when it can become an issue, because the person hasn't learned to eat in a way which is how they're going to eat long term. Yeah. Where, so it's like, that's what I love. Like, there's no, like, if somebody wants to follow a ketogenic diet, like, they can totally do that. Yeah. And that's why I always just try to, like, pull the microscope out a little bit and say, okay, well, big picture, like, long term, is this what you want to do long term? And some people are like, yeah, like, I did this before, I did it for a few years and I love it. And I was like, okay. And other people are like, no, I definitely don't think this is sustainable. I can only do this for like 4 to 6 weeks. And so I'll say, okay, well, maybe we start off with something that kind of matches more of what your life is going to look like for the next 20, 40 years. So we can make sure we establish these new behaviors using methods that match with your personal preferences and your lifestyle. If that makes sense. Yeah,
definitely. And then one thing that I'd really like to touch on is, what about when it comes to, so say for example, I have a friend, he's more of sort of a bodybuilder sort of style, but he's quite gen pop, doesn't want to compete in bodybuilding. He just sort of lifts, but then also just wants to lose a little bit of weight. And the main issue that I see with his nutrition is whenever he messes up in any regard, he will just completely binge, just say, oh, fuck it, I ruined it. And then just say, okay, I'll start again next week. How do you deal with those issues when it comes to just binging and just it becoming like a catastrophe of calories? Like, say if they're meant to be on 2,000 or something, and then they just go and eat 5,000 one day, and they're just like, oh shit, fuck it, like, I'll start again tomorrow. How do you deal with those sort of issues mentally and also logistically, like trying to figure out how to sort of maybe play damage control or prevent it the next time?
Okay. Well, looking at kind of the mechanics side of stuff, I'll look at what is our protocol? So I'll make sure that the protocol that the person is following isn't too intense. So it's not anything that's like, it's not too invasive. It's where it should be in terms of like their calorie needs. Like we don't have their calories set too low.
Right. So we're not
talking
facilitate
like stuff like benching.
The caloric deficit isn't too aggressive, and that the diet is relatively flexible.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And so, and making sure, like, again, like looking at all just the hard numbers, the protein, like you said, that there's plenty of flexibility in the diet. And then I would look at their behaviors, and I would maybe have them track just their meal patterns. So it's like, hey, this week I want you to write down the times that you eat each meal and an estimation of how many calories you think are in that meal. Right. And so I'll make sure that the person doesn't have any behaviors that are setting them up for binging, because that's a common one. Like that's a very common reason for binging is we just do stuff that sets ourselves up for it.
What would some of those behaviors be?
A big one is that I've seen, and I know this works for some people, and for some it causes challenges. So again, that's where it comes back to individuality. But the long periods of fasting. So trying if someone is dieting and trying to save a bunch of calories for like their last meal. So they might, it's like they might have like 500 calories over 18 hours, and then over a 1 hour period have the rest of them. And so it's like trying to save all these calories for night. And then they'll wake up with a bunch of like GI symptoms. They'll be bloated. They'll feel sluggish, and it's kind of like, and it becomes this cycle when it's because now they feel terrible in the morning. They don't want to eat. And so the day goes on, and then once the day goes on, they're like, ooh, I'm just going to save the calories and wait until night so I can have this big meal. Right. And then it just creates this cycle. And so I'll make sure that there's nothing like that going on behaviorally. Yeah. And if there is, I'll be, okay, well, let's change that. This week I want you to like spread your meals out, and I want you to like disperse things a bit differently, and like that will instantly fix it. So that's the first place I look are like my prescriptions for the person, like are they appropriate for this person? And And that could come down to, like you said, looking at like maybe fat or carbohydrate differences. Like, cause some people do feel better on certain things. Like some people do adhere better on a higher carb diet, and some people do adhere better on a higher fat diet.
Yeah.
It just depends on the person. So I'll look at prescriptions, I'll look at their behaviors, and then from there is if all of that looks to be in place, or if it hasn't come up already, we'll look at kind of the psychology and see, what is prompting these binges. Are they doing this as a way to kind of manage their emotions? Are they doing this out of stress? Are they doing this to meet some other need? And so that's when we'll kind of investigate that together. And if we identify that it is for something like that, then we create a game plan to address that need.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like once you've fixed the need, the person no longer needs to use binging to try to fill that need.
Do you feel like they're using it like as a tool, or they're using it as like, oh shit, I messed up, this is how I mentally recuperate? Or what do you think people use binging as? Or obviously I don't think they're meaning to overconsume, but do you think, is there what's the main reason that you think people do it?
It could be, honestly, it could be a lot of reasons, but both of the ones you said are prevalent. One being like, yeah, they are using food as a tool because food is extremely convenient and it's very effective at changing how we feel. Yeah. Like if we can be angry or sad or lonely and eat a tub of ice cream and temporarily feel better. And that's like, you don't have to, that's very easy. You can just go to the grocery store and it's very convenient. Yeah. So, and another one, I'm blanking. The second one you said was, just kind of like that, rolling into that mindset of like, well, it wasn't perfect, and so I might as well just have whatever. And like that actually is really common, and that would be very different than using food as a tool. That's more of kind of like the general philosophy behind how some of this stuff works. And so that's where it's kind of on the coach's end or on my end to make sure that we replace that philosophy with one that supports this person and supports and that's where I look a lot at, because like people's, like all of our personalities are so different, and so I'll try to set up a person's protocol so it aligns with that person's personality. If the person is very detail oriented, I'm not going to have them track a bunch of things, because that's only going to exacerbate their kind of like their focus and their ability to get tunnel vision. Like we don't need to focus on that. Or it's like somebody else who may be a little more like not as focused and a little bit more loose with stuff. I might need them to track a bit more to kind of help hone that in. Right. So I try to also tailor the protocol that aligns with the person's personality. And again, if it is like that mindset of like, I had a little bit and I messed up, so screw it, I might as well eat a whole bunch. Yeah. Like talking through that together and getting them to tell me like from their own words. Because like if we really stop and think about it, like we all know that's silly. Yeah. Like even the person right when they do it, like even right when we do that, we know it's silly. It's just in the moment we have those emotions that flood us, and we have this goal that we care a lot about. And now we feel like we set ourselves back on that goal. And so now we're angry. And so we're in that mental state where we're going to make bad decisions. Right. And so that's where I like to give people little tools to change their emotional state so they can make a better decision. So it's like kind of breaking that mental pattern. So if they get angry at themselves because they maybe went a little bit off track, maybe having them listen to just a song, a really like happy, upbeat song that they enjoy. Because within a few minutes, you feel so much better. You're in a very relaxed, peaceful state of mind, and then you'll make a much better decision. Yeah. So it's like making sure that they have tools, like more effective ways to manage their emotions, and then also making sure that the philosophies that we're following are the appropriate philosophies for establishing a new behavior, one that's going to last long term. Right. So kind of looking at both sides of those.
Right, so then sort of it makes it so they won't have that impulse reaction to just say fuck it and go and eat the ice cream. They can just do a more sustainable sort of method of recovering from that guilt if they do mess up or if something happens, instead of having that sort of very destructive method of just binge eating. So I think it's very prevalent, and I think almost like you'll see everyone, say if you're at here's a good example. My friend Steve Hall from Revive Stronger, he went to a wedding a while ago, and everyone around him was eating all this crap. He was cutting, so he's a bodybuilder, so I guess it's a bit different, and they were all eating all these pastries and stuff, and he sort of just had a little bit, just had a little of everything. And then that sort of, he still was able to participate and all that, but then it was the thing of, okay, if I want to stick with my goals, I can't have 8 Cornish pasties or whatever. Like, just needs to relax a little bit.
Yeah. And like you said, that scenario is entirely different when you're talking about, because like this whole conversation is based around the frame that the person's physiology is at where their body likes to be or above, not below. So of course, the whole dynamic of the conversation changes if we're dealing with a body in a starved state. So, but that's kind of, and that's where, like, because if you, like, what ends up happening is, like, if we have, when we get off track, like, let's say we're feeling an emotion and we are using food to do that, a lot of times it's because we don't have an alternative method. And so it's like, and if all I do is I tell the person, I'm just like, hey, don't use food to do that, what happens is now they're feeling this negative emotion, and they have, or this I should say, uncomfortable emotion, and they have no way to change that, and so they only know this one pattern, and so they're just going to go back to it. So I try to give people alternative patterns, so it's like they're not just like sitting there all revved up, not knowing what to do, because I just say don't use food. I found it's much more effective to give them an alternative behavior, so a different route to go. So when they're feeling that way, boom, now I listen to a song, or boom, now I call a friend, or boom, now I pray, or whatever it is. They have a new pattern they can go to, and then make a decision from there, from that new state of mind.
Right. So it's just sort of a bit of a mind shift, and they can get out of any negative habits. Would binging, you say, be the main negative habit that sort of can be quite destructive? Or is there other ones, like, associated with guilt or something like that? Or anything like that where you think something that is relatively easy to fix or can be fixed over a long period of time?
I would honestly say the biggest thing would be, it wouldn't be binging, but it would be going, like, let's say being 95% on point with the protocol for the week, right, and focusing only on the 5% that they didn't get right, and then allowing that to derail them. So it's like they didn't binge, or they didn't have like no like, let's say no binge afterwards, but you can see that the cart's starting to go off the tracks because of that 5%. And so that's why it's like, I just make sure that the focus stays on, like, look, like that 5% doesn't even matter, like it just doesn't matter, like look at all this stuff we did right. Like, just like focus on this. And it's just like that confident reinforcement of, like, you are doing exactly what you need to do. Like, all we need is more time. Like, because there is that time component. So it's like just trying to, like, pace the person, again, based on their personality. Some people, it's like you got to push a little bit harder. Other people, you got to put a governor on and hold them back so they don't go too fast and burn out or get hurt or something. So it's like learning that person, learning their personality, and then pacing them appropriately, both with the protocol and both with our conversations and what I'm saying and the questions I'm asking and things like that. So, but it's not the binges. It's just that the focus being on the 5% wrong versus on the 95% right. And again, a lot of that falls on my end, making sure that I've clearly communicated and they're in alignment with an appropriate response and appropriate philosophies that are going to support them. Yeah.
I completely agree. Like, it's a lot of people focus on that tiny little 5%, and it's like, in reality, they'll still be in a caloric deficit compared to the last week, or they'll still be, like, compared to what they were doing before they started any of this, it's like they're making huge strides. And I think it's always hard to sort of keep that in perspective, because I think they take the progress for granted or something. And I think I even see it in myself, like, if you have success in any area, and then you just see that as a given now, and then any failures that happen are very easy to look down upon, or look, oh damn, that sucks, why'd I do that, oh my god. But then in reality, like, there's been 8 wins this week or whatever, and it's like, that's the thing that I think people love to focus on the negative, or like they tend towards doing it, but I think it's very hard to not in some cases.
Yeah, well, it's hard, like you said. I'm the same way, and you said you're the same way at times. It's just like, because you have this, when you really care about something, like, you want to be you want to do everything you can, and you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can. And so you feel like if you're not, it kind of like bums you out because you're like blaming yourself.
100%.
And yeah, and so it's like that's where it's just like having a way to step back. And like you said, and the bar is always moving too, right? Like I might start with someone, they might be at 240 pounds, and you know they're just like they can't wait to get to 225, and they get to 225, and now it's like they're already dissatisfied again. Like I can't wait to get to 210, you know. So it's like the bar is always moving, and so it's like I do a lot of like reflecting as well during like my check-in. So it's like I have them keep logs, and like sometimes we'll journal and things like that. 'Cause it's like that bar is going to keep moving, and it's like. It's great to be a bit dissatisfied, or else you know that motivation wouldn't be there. Yeah. But it's just like making sure that's being channeled properly, and like making sure that we're like it's the same thing with business, you know, like making sure we're enjoying the journey and the victories along the way.
Especially with body composition, I think it's very tricky. Like I think it was Andrea. She had a few issues with body issues, and then it's sort of like. She's now gotten back to a place of more happiness with her body. I think it's a very hard thing. Like, say, for instance, for myself, a quote that I really like is, once you step in a gym, or once you start caring about your body, or trying to fix your body, you'll never be happy with your body again. And it's like, it's ironic, but it's probably true. And it's very, very hard to keep in mind and actually manage. But yeah, I think I'll cover one last thing, and then we'll probably end it here. So what do you think is the main things that make the most difference for people trying to lose weight, trying to gain weight, trying to just change their body composition using nutrition?
Are you talking about, do you have any like specific way you want me to go with that?
Yeah, so just with normal general population people, what do you think are the main things that you just cannot get wrong, the non-negotiables? Or do you think that those even exist? Or is it mainly just sort of more subjective things and finding what works for you? Or what do you think, what do you find makes the biggest differences with people?
Yeah, I think there's kind of the biggest thing, just to frame it, and then I can get a little more specific, is whenever you're decided that you want to make these changes, like looking long term and seeing like what is your outcome for these changes. Like, is this something you're doing to prepare for an event? Because if it is, you can use different methods than if you're wanting to make this a lifestyle. And if you're wanting it to be a lifestyle and you're wanting to make these behaviors and this new lifestyle sustainable, keeping that in mind as you search for your methods that you're going to put into place to achieve that. And of course there are like certain, let's say, principles that need to be in place. Like if someone wants to lose weight, like, you know, they need to be in a caloric deficit and, you know, and things like that. But I always just say, like, there's just so much, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of like the specifics, whether it's a higher carb or a higher fat, or whether it's, you know, how many, like you want to have all days the same, or you want to have some days that are lower calories and some days are higher calories. Like there's so many different ways to do stuff. And I think just like making sure that whatever methods that you're using, like I said, they're going to line up with what you want to do long term, and they're things that you enjoy. That is just the frame of it that I would say. And yeah, I know it's kind of really been the frame of the whole conversation, right? Because I guess it's because I'm leery to like give like very specific stuff, because there doesn't need to be specific stuff. You know, it's more like the general, like a lot of the stuff. It's like the only thing that I like from what I know is needs to be specific is calorie deficit, or if the goal is weight loss, it's like that's pretty much it. Like, and then there's a few other things that would be really good to hit, but it's like that's the only non-negotiable. I think from what you've said a lot of the time, it's like you just got to be. I think a lot of people are very sort of perfectionism with it, and it's like in reality you cannot be perfect with this sort of stuff, because in reality, like, are you really going to measure everything? Are you going to control everything? Some people can, but it's like for most people I don't think it's sustainable. And I think a lot of what you do is more focused on sustainability, and it's like if we could somehow get
95% of the population to have sustainable habits. Like, if we could get someone like yourself to work with everyone in the whole world, that'd be phenomenal, because it's like then obesity rates would go far down, like diabetes would go down, so many issues would go down. And I think this is why I'm sort of changing I'm changing my degree. Well, I'm doing a different degree after this one, because I've realized I don't want to work in healthcare treating the symptoms of obesity. And I think it's a very hard thing to sort of think of. And I didn't realize it for a long time, but it's like, if you start at health and you start at nutrition and you start at fitness, I feel like that's where you can really make the difference. And I think there are a lot of people, if they can get back to the sort of peak health or relatively good health and relatively good nutrition, good weight, then it's like, I think we would literally be so much better off. And it's obviously going to be a hard problem to fix, but it's like, information is more prevalent than ever. Podcasts are free. Like, you can go on YouTube and you get all this good information, and like Team 3DMJ exists, so it's like you can get quality information from them. And it's just like, there's so much unbiased information out there. I mean, there's a lot of trash out there, but it's like, I think there's an equal amount of just good information from people like, say, Steve from Revive Stronger, Team 3DMJ, like, just absolutely like great people who are just putting out like great information. And it's like, I think we can get to a point where we can solve the obesity epidemic, or like get to a point where it's not going in the wrong direction. Hopefully.
Yeah, and that's the double-edged sword, though, right? Because there's so much information out there, and it's all conflicting. And so that is kind of like, that's something else I run into. Is like, it's like me talking about cars. Like, when I hear 40 perspectives, like, you don't know which one to believe. You don't know what's right or what to do. And so it's like, there's so much great information out there, and it's like finding out how to find the information that aligns with, kind of the nutritional principles that make sense. And but yeah, in terms of like, the specifics, like, really, like, that is my whole focus, is sustainability. And that's why I love like learning about different strategies like ketogenic approaches and like, higher carb approaches and all those different stuff, because it's like they all have their place, and it's like no one is right or wrong. It's just like, what is going to work for this person long term. And like, there's like, and again, it's like, if somebody wants to eat all organic food, or if somebody wants to avoid certain food substances, or they don't want to have artificial sweeteners, like, it doesn't matter either way. Like, that's what I love. Like, I don't have to come in there and be like, no, you can't have this, or yes, you have to have that. It's like, there's like, as long as the main things are there. And so on my end, like, literally, I do calorie balance. I normally set some sort of protein target. I make sure the person's consuming plenty of micronutrients, fruits and vegetables. I try to, once it's appropriate, like once we kind of have the nutrition in place, I help them establish some sort of resistance training program, because there are unique benefits that come from that. And that especially becomes more important as we get older. So it's like, I make sure that there's a resistance training program in place, and then some sort of daily activity. So calories, protein, fruits and veggies, resistance training, some sort of daily activity, whether that's steps or biking, or some people like to jog, and whatever that is. And that's where there's so much flexibility. Dancing, like, I have all kinds of, like, there's just so many options, but those are kind of my main focuses. And then I'll look at some of the other stuff, because the things I try to identify, like when somebody comes, is like, we all do these different things because of how they make us feel at some level. Like, you're not reaching out to me, like, somebody's not reaching out, or like, to lose weight for the sake of seeing a lower number on the scale. It's for how it's going to make them feel about themselves, how it's going to make them feel physically, and then what they're going to be able to achieve through doing that. And so it's like, that's a lot of times like how I'll help people find motivation, is like, you're not coming to see a lower number on the scale. It's like, what do you want to gain? Like, what are the actual, like, what do you want to gain from doing this? And then putting our focus on that. So that's why I end up doing a lot of like other behavioral stuff or other lifestyle stuff, because it's just all woven together and you can't separate it.
So it's like, there's so many things that go into it, but it's like, in reality, it's quite simple, but it's like, to get the basics down, it's not basic. And I think, like, I love that quote, but it's like, for resistance training it's true, and for like nutrition it's true, and it's like for so many things it is true, and people skip the basics out of ego, I think, a lot of the time, or just out of not thinking they're important, or not thinking they don't know them. And it's like, in reality, the basics are not basic. And yeah, I think that's just the end of the day. So where can people find you online? Where can people find, say, if you're on Instagram, if you have a website, where can people find your clinic? Where would people sort of find you?
Yeah, I mean, you can, pretty much everything is Steve Taylor RD. So my website's stevetaylorrd.com. Any social media, so Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Steve Taylor RD. And email address is steve@stevetaylorrd.com. So pretty consistent with that.
Sweet, cool. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Student Side Hustle. I would appreciate so much if you would leave a review if you'd like to hear more of what I'm saying. Then I would love if you would follow me on Instagram or check out my other social media, all linked in the show notes. And again, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful evening and study hard.